have, I want to make sure that folks know that we have a special memorial called the Melvin Bishop Memorial that helps to support speakers. It's specifically for speakers. And so we use that for a match often with other grants. And Melvin is our friend. He has given us a lot, including a number of books. If you look in the library, you'll see a number of books, and his stamp is right next to it. We have already inherited his books, and we appreciate all the bishops and their continued support for the Fort Wallace Museum. So thank you, Lynn. Okay, so Mike, thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and I'm glad she mentioned that this talk has been a long time in preparation for about 2 years, and you can chalk it up to why it's taken 2 years to finally reach this point. So I appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to sharing this educational experience. I'm an old professor, this educational experience with you. The Otero Sellars and Company was one of the greatest mercantile companies along the Smoky Hill Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, the Kansas Pacific, the Atchison, Topeka, and the Santa Fe, and as we'll be seeing, even the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. Just to give you an idea of how important a mercantile enterprise Mr. Otero and Mr. Sellars, you want me to pull it up?
Yeah, pull it up and point it.
It's all right, you just keep talking, I'll face it.
Mr. Otero and Mr. Sellars, just to emphasize how big a business this was, I'm going to quote from the Las Animas Daily Leader from Las Animas, Colorado, for June 2nd, 1876. The editor says, trains, wagon trains, box trains, were loaded as follows this week by Otero Sellar and Company. Jesus Mora, mule team, 15,000 pounds. Perfidio Apodaca, ox teams, 32,000 pounds for St. James and Company, Camp Apache. Manuel Sanchez, ox wagons, 10,000 pounds for Las Vegas. Tomas Chavez, mule wagons, 12,000 pounds for W.B. Strap, Las Vegas. Nazario Gonzalez, oxen, 30,000 pounds for Spiegelberg Brothers in Santa Fe. And if you take a look at the timeline out there on this side of it, there's a picture of the 5 Spiegelberg brothers who ran a mercantile establishment in Santa Fe. They came down the Santa Fe Trail as Jewish merchants. And so they've ordered goods from the East, and Otero Sellar and Company is using their facilities to send them by the things they need by ox team. Ignacio Hazan, oxen, 20,000 pounds. Juan Barrela, mule teams, 20,000 pounds for H. Springer in Albuquerque. Juan Santesteban, 5,000 pounds, 1 ox wagon for his store in Taos. And Francisco Montoya, oxen, 10,000 pounds, headed for Mimbres, New Mexico. That's in 1 month. The next month it was repeated, and the next month it was repeated, and the next month it was repeated, and all the way along the track, the Kansas Pacific and the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. But we're going to be getting to that. Just one more emphasis on how important this enterprise was. A historian who lived in La Junta at the time later wrote, sometimes there were as many as 100 trains here at one time. At night, it made a great sight with their campfires. Each outfit formed its wagons into a corral, and after feeding the mules corn, the stock was turned out on the prairie to feed. The freighters would then make campfires in the center of their wagon corral. 100 campfires out there with the oxen and the mules wandering around. However, within 4 years, the old trail would see the last of this traffic because the railroad reached Santa Fe in 1880. But it's nice and romantic to think of. Of course, it was dusty and dirty and hot. Everything we've experienced today, so. That said, I'm not going to concentrate on the mercantile side of Otero, Sellar and Company. What I want to do is talk about their families. That's why it's a saga of two families. Basically, what my point is going to be is that Mrs. Otero and Mrs. Sellers were both very refined ladies, as we'll be seeing. Mrs. Otero grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, in a wealthy slave-owning family. Mrs. Sellar was from London, England. And we'll just keep this in mind. We can't see Sheridan from here, but think of these refined ladies in the lawless West, raising children. The Sellar family, there was only Marie, a daughter. The Oteros had 4 children, as we'll be seeing. And the best source that I have for these families and what they experienced comes from memoirs by the children. Again, as we'll be seeing, Miguel Jr. Otero wrote a book called My Life on the Frontier, which is absolutely fascinating for the Smoky Hill Trail and the Kansas Pacific, and it's a good, funny read. He was a great author. And Marie Sellar Bullard wrote her memoirs that are published sort of obscurely in the New Mexico Historical Review, but it's online. In fact, most of this stuff is online. So we're going to be taking a look then at the families. We will begin then at the end, actually. Once when I was teaching U.S. history for about the 39th time, I thought, I am so bored. Blah, 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 blah. So I started at the end. I said, today is, and we're going backwards, and we just read the textbook backwards. Didn't make much of a difference, but at least I wasn't. So we're starting at the end. The Otero Sellar Company, as it says here, dissolved its partnership in 1881. When does the railroad, as I say, get to Santa Fe? 1880. So the era of mercantilism and big money and the wagon trains and everything was over. In fact, Otero and Sellar knew that because, as we'll be seeing, they followed the Kansas Pacific and then the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. And, of course, every newspaper had various advertisements from them. Let's get oriented. We're going to be talking about the Kansas Pacific, and specifically we'll talk about Fort Harker, Hays City, as it was called, Sheridan, and Kit Carson. Then the Kansas Pacific went on to Denver, but General William Jackson Palmer, who was the head of it, thought, oh, I'll go down to Santa Fe too. So he built 2 from Kit Carson to Las Animas and La Junta, and then the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe ripped the rug out from under him, the ties out from under him. They stole all of his rails, I don't know, but they predominated. And of course, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe entered on the Santa Fe Trail in Granada in southwestern Colorado, and then went on to Las Animas, La Junta, and Trinidad, El Morro, Trinidad, Otero, and Las Vegas and Santa Fe. They didn't have a commission house in Las Animas because the railroad was being built so fast that they tore down buildings in one place, and the railroad was already past the place they were figuring on they were going to move to. So they weren't in all of the towns along the Santa Fe. And now we can get oriented in time. We've got the Kansas Pacific Railway starting, of course, further east, but reaching Junction City in 1866, blah, 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 blah. I hate people who put things on slides and then read them to you. I mean, I assume everyone has a high school education, but you can see it reaches La Junta in 1875. Now, notice the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe, it's later. See, it comes in later, but usurps the the trails to Santa Fe with its rails. So Grenada, Colorado in 1873, and then reaching Santa Fe in 1880. The Denver and Rio Grande was the brainchild of William Jackson Palmer, who was the chief engineer, bottle washer, everything for the Eastern Division of the Union Pacific and then the Kansas Pacific. And then when he reached El Morro, which is down in southeastern Colorado, southwest eastern Colorado, he decided there was a lot of money to be made in the coal industry there, so he just sort of stopped. And then he realized that there was a lot of money to be made in narrow gauge railroads built to the mines in western Colorado. So he just sort of never went any further. He tried. There's the famous story, which I'll skip, of the Denver and Rio Grande and the Santa Fe going over Raton Pass, and both of the chief engineers got to Trinidad at the same evening, and the Denver and Rio Grande engineers stopped for supper, and the Santa Fe ones didn't, and they got Uncle Dick Wooten to sign the contract, letting them build through Raton Pass, which he owned part of. His sale price was groceries for himself, his children, and his grandchildren. The last grandchild died in 1955, so it was a good deal as far as he was concerned. So we've got these three railroads then. Let's start with the Otero family. I've got a thing for Miguel Otero Sr. You'll be seeing, he's just fascinating frontier figure who moves through three cultures actually, Hispanic, Anglo, and the West. He lives from 1829, born into wealth on a rancho in southern New Mexico, and dies in 1882. His wife, who we're going to talk more about, Mary Josephine Blackwood, as you can see, is born in New Orleans, and then she is educated in Charleston, South Carolina, as I said, and he meets her, as we'll be seeing, at a party in St. Louis. She came from wealth, as I said. Blackwood, that was a Scottish family who owned the biggest book publishing company in the 19th century in England. So there was that money. And then, as I say, as we'll be seeing, she came from an even more distinguished background than that. They had 4 children, married in 1857. Paige, I've seen it spelled both ways, Miguel, Gertrude, who, as you can see, dies at, do the math, and Mamie. And that's Mamie over there. So you can see what cultured people these are, and then we'll be seeing what Sheridan looked like, okay? The boys were, Paige and Miguel, they were, I hope none of you had children like them, okay? They were the scourge of their parents' life. They were constantly, and you can tell, they're always in trouble, okay? From the time they're 8, 10, teenage years, it was hell for Mary and Miguel. They tried to send both boys back to college in, to boarding school in St. Louis at one of the Catholic boarding schools, and then to St. Louis University. And neither of the boys, all they wanted to do was hunt buffalo and pal around with Wild Bill Hickok, which they did. And so their parents would put them on from the railhead on the train headed back east. And by the time the parents got home, they jumped the rails, caught another train, and were sitting in the living room saying, ha, 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 we're not going, you know. Great stories in Miguel's book on the family. So there's Mary Josephine. One of her ancestors was Charles Carroll, who signed the Declaration of Independence. I'm just amazed what you can find on the internet. That's the hotel she was born in New Orleans, okay? It's an old photograph. After these hurricanes, who knows what's standing in New Orleans? But I just thought that was fascinating. I could see the hotel she was born at there. I've included the pictures of New Orleans, where she was born, and St. Louis, where she was married, because look at those, they're cities, okay? They're world cities, they're civilization, there are clubs, there are libraries, there are symphony orchestras, there are cotillions, there are balls, there are debutantes, there are everything you can think of that a wealthy, cultured woman would participate in as she grew up in her teenage years and into her 20s. That's what Mary Josephine had. And as I say, we'll be seeing what she puts up with. So this is the west side of Las Vegas. She's rides stagecoaches, just like that, okay. Nice romantic picture, which you've got out here in the museum. A romanticized picture of the railroads and the buffaloes. They broke up, as we saw, the company in 1881. So this is 4 years previously. The west side of the plaza in Las Vegas. Not exactly prime real estate, okay? It's pretty rough looking. If you're familiar with the Las Vegas Plaza, on my right side, that's been replaced by the Plaza Hotel, which is still there. These buildings are still there. Casa de Musica, there's an art gallery in them now, and it's from the roof of that one that Stephen Watts Kearny declared the Southwest American Territory in 1846. But cast your mind back. This is what Mary Josephine finds when she gets to Las Vegas, and they open a store there. As I mentioned, Miguel Jr. has a memoir, My Life on the Frontier, and here's what he has to say of his mother. Notice the words distinguished, brilliant intellect, loveliness of character, society woman, admired in Washington, New Mexico, St. Louis, and Denver. Miguel Sr., her husband, was a delegate from New Mexico, territory of New Mexico, for a whole decade in the 1850s. So she moved in Washington society, and then she came to Kit Carson. You can. I just find that so fascinating. If you haven't read this book, go find it. It's. I'll quote from it again if I have time. My wife's my timekeeper, and she's going to stand up and yell at me if I go too far. Now we'll go to the Sellar family. Not much known about the Sellar family. They didn't keep as good a records. The one memoir that Marie wrote is only 20 pages long. But again, what you can find on the internet, they were married at that church. And if I wanted to, I could have downloaded the marriage record on Ancestry.com of the two of them. But they immigrated then in 1859, and he taught school on the Mississippi River in Illinois for one term, let's say 4 or 5 months. And as Marie says, her mother didn't want her to be born in the wilds of nowhere, even if it was Illinois. So let's move to St. Louis. And so they moved to St. Louis then. Now, you can read what Marie has to say. Why her parents, were doing there. Her father finds employment in a number of different mercantile establishments, some just locally trading and others trading along the newly built railroads and along the old Santa Fe Trail. And what I like here is both of these families are in St. Louis at the same time. Fate intervenes, and now we'll pick up on fate. So her father was employed by one firm, Russell and Samuels, and then he packs the saddlebags for the people who ride the Pony Express, working for Russell, Majors, and Waddell. And then Miguel Jr. says, while my father and our family were in Leavenworth, they become acquainted, and they decide, let's go into business together. And they opened their first tentative store. They're really not dealing in hides or wool or anything from the Southwest. What they're doing is selling goods that have come from the East Coast and selling them to people at the fort, and then people moving in, following the railroad to settle. So they're in Leavenworth. Horrible pictures of Leavenworth. Ooh, what happened there? That's interesting. Well, I happen to have the slide right here. This is something that just fascinated me when I ran across it quite by accident in the Smoky Hill and Republican Union, published in Junction City, Kansas, in December 26, 1863. As I said, Miguel and John have opened a store in Fort Harker in 1867. This appears in the paper in 1863, and it's headlined Wyandotte, Kansas, October 31st, 1863. Dear Sir, in answer to your communication through Mr. Broughton, I beg leave to state that the main line of the Union Pacific Railway Eastern Division commences on the south bank of the Kansas River so as to connect with the Pacific Railroad of Missouri, runs up the Kansas River to Fort Riley. It is the purpose of the company and the express desire of the government that the continuation of our line west of Fort Riley should be located far enough south to accommodate the Colorado and Santa Fe trade. Well, he's writing in response to a query from somebody, where's the railroad going and how long is it going to take you to get there? And the person writing it is most likely thinking, I wonder if I can cash in on this. And it ends, I shall be very glad to hear from you and to have you forward to us as much information within your knowledge as in your judgment will promote the interest of the enterprise, particularly the statistics of the resources and trade of that wonderfully flavored and yet little-known country, New Mexico. And it's signed by an agent of the Kansas Pacific, J.M. Hollett, drum roll, and it's written to Miguel Otero in 1863. They don't open their business till 1867. He was one damn smart businessman. He's looking forward 4 years down. When can I stop taking wagon trains on the Santa Fe Trail and begin to use the railroad? You would have read it yourself. Well, I don't know what happened to these. So now we're going to be in Hays City. And Marie comments that in Hays City, the venture came off. They had started at Fort Harker, but then when they made a go of it, they moved to Hays City. And in Hays City, they were able to open their first warehouse and start buying hides and wool and products from the West and sending them east and then selling things further on. So once again, here you have Hays City and Mrs. Bullard from London. Imagine she gets off the train. I better not use four-letter words. She wouldn't have. But just where in hell am I? Okay? And the same with Mrs. Otero. And then, as I say, Miguel Jr. just writes hilarious stuff. He's about 6 years old when they're in Hays City, but he remembers Calamity Jane and the legend of Calamity Jane. I hope there are no problems in this one, okay? Okay, we'll move on to Sheridan and Kit Carson and La Junta. And being here at Fort Wallace and talking about Sheridan, I will tiptoe very carefully because people might know more than I do about Sheridan, okay? I love the quote from Marie Bullard. She's about 9 years old, And she says, not far from Sheridan was a military post, Fort Wallace. I attended an officer's ball there and felt very proud of myself dancing with the subaltern. She's 9, okay. Later, one of them gave me my dog Puck, which was my companion and pet for many years. Okay, so just 2 miles from here, we can imagine Marie and Miguel. Okay, then they move on to Kit Carson, and as I say, on to La Junta, and we have some views of that. Marie, in her memoir, says, I think the Hayes venture was greatly tentative, and being successful, the Sheridan warehouses were much longer. And my father built a cottage nearby where we lived, and which was moved to Kit Carson when the warehouses went. That moving left a lasting impression. You know, you could go to bed one night and Sheridan wake, well, not really, but wake up in the same bedroom the next day in Kit Carson. They just loaded it on the train and took it along. The office safes and furniture were moved into a freight car, and all the stock loaded in cars. Then one morning, a swarm of men climbed the roof of the warehouse and sawed it into strips the size of a flat car and also the sides of the building, and they loaded in piles like a pack of cards. In a short time, Sheridan, a busy, bustling frontier town, had little left but piles of empty cans and excavated cellars, and all the inhabitants were denizens of Kit Carson in their rehabilitated houses. The cemetery, however, remained with nearly 100 graves, most by violent death and some by Indian massacres, to tell the tale of frontier days. At one time, the estimated population of Sheridan was 2,000 people, and of wagons encamped around 1,000, okay? And speaking of the cemetery, Mike Bond told me today he's been out with ground-penetrating radar. Fort Wallace was, okay. Well, somebody went out there and found 10 of the graves, tentatively, okay? Maybe the rest, you say, washed away.
Probably removed it when they operated sand pit.
Okay, when they operated?
They were taking sand out of this hillside where the graves were.
Okay, they took sand out of the hillside where the graves were, okay. My friend Frank Norris, who's going to talk to you next, and I drove out there today. Frank's been besotted with Sheridan for 10, 15 years, I think, every time I see him. So today he wanted to, where's Sheridan, where's Sheridan? And you took us out there with the Smoky Hill Trail people, what, about 3 years ago, 4 years ago, or something like that. I actually could say, well, I know where Sheridan is, okay, which is something. Okay, where did I put that? Now we move on to the AT and SF. And as I said earlier, it really enters in, as far as the Santa Fe Trail is concerned, at Granada. And so there's a little ad from them from Granada, but oddly, it's in the Sawachi Journal, which is further west in Colorado. And then in El Moro, which remember is at the end of the line as far as the Denver and Rio Grande is concerned. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe didn't build into El Moro, but Otero and Sellar opened a warehouse in El Moro because you could bring goods from the Southwest, from New Mexico, Arizona, West Texas, and send them on the Denver and Rio Grande to Denver, and then they could be shipped east to the big markets on the Kansas Pacific, linking up with the railroads east of the Mississippi. At this time, the biggest wool market in the world was Boston, Massachusetts, and that's where all the wool from the Southwest went and then was shipped to the English woolen mills. At one point between 1890 and 1910, 1912, just out of Las Vegas, New Mexico alone, 1 million pounds of wool a year were shipped. So that's what went east, where these mercantile houses made their money. And here we have Paige and Miguel again. It's really hard to find Otero. It's harder to find Otero than it is to find Sheridan, by the way. there is nothing there, and it's not on any maps, although there's a guy named Glenn Stevens who did some historical maps of trails in northeastern New Mexico. And he located Otero. It's 5 miles south of Raton. If you're whizzing down the I-25 in Raton, be sure you don't hit 75 until you're about 2 miles south of town. And then about 3 more miles, you just look over to the right, and that's where Otero was. It only lasted 5 months, okay? The railroad came in. It was named after Miguel Sr. It flourished a little bit, and then everything moved on. And again, this is Miguel writing. No, this is the correspond to the Weekly Chieftain. A city as yet has no calaboose, and when a man gets too drunk to navigate and gets obstreperous, the constable leads him to a telegraph pole, and while the chap is leaning up to it, he snaps the handcuffs on him and leaves him to hug it until sober. Okay. It's so much fun to research this stuff. Just find out all kinds of interesting stuff, okay? Well, all of these places, as they went down the line, they moved the warehouses and the houses, and as they said in Sheridan, it all gets located further and further and further on down the line. In El Moro, as I say, Otero and Sellar had warehouses for a time so they could ship to Denver. The only really glimpse we have of John Sellar, I mean, as I say, Miguel is all over the place, Senior, comes from Miguel Jr. Writing about his experiences with his brother Page when they were the clerks at the company store in El Moro. And they raised hell there just as they raised hell everywhere. They're about 16, 17 years old at this point. And how much time have I got left? 5 minutes? Okay, I'll read fast.
No, you've got 20.
I've got 20? That way I won't have to take questions and my ignorance won't show. Okay. He and Paige went to the local dance hall, okay, and there was a fracas when everybody had a little bit too much, and they were dallying with the fancies, as they were called, and the locals basically got pissed off at them, okay, and so they take after them with pistols, okay, and so Paige and Miguel are headed for the warehouse, and this is what he writes. We had left one of the warehouse doors unlocked so that we could enter without making any noise. Consequently, all we had to do was wait until the watchman was on the opposite side of the warehouse and then slip in. But there were no flashlights in those days, so we had to feel our way through the warehouse. It was customary when a large outfit came into town to be loaded for the owner or the wagon boss to bring his bed over and sleep in the warehouse. And that evening, Jack Chandler, a well-known freighter, had arrived and made his bed in the main aisle of our warehouse. Paige was in the lead, and the first thing I knew, I heard a low cry from that direction. It seemed that Paige had stepped on Jack Chandler's neck, and being a powerful man, he had grabbed Paige's leg in such a manner that the latter thought he'd stepped into a bear trap. We quickly explained to Jack, and then all three of us enjoyed a brief suppressed laughter over the accident. Then Paige and I continued on our way, finally reaching the retail department. Here we had to proceed more carefully because we could see through the upper window, and as I said, with a few pictures we have, Mr. Sellar reading in his bed with a student lamp on a table at the head of the bed, while an extra-large lemonade glass filled with choice brandy and imported ginger ale stood beside the lamp. We felt our way slowly to the staircase. After reaching the second floor, we were groping along as best we could when suddenly Paige walked right into a stepladder, which stood open in the main aisle. Of course, it closed and fell with a crash. Paige and I ran to our room and had hardly jumped into bed, still dressed, when the door swung open and Mr. Sellar, in his nightdress, entered. Feigning to have been awakened out of a deep sleep, I mumbled, "Who's there? Who's there?" Mr. Sellar merely asked, "Boys, did you hear a noise out there, like something falling?" We both quickly answered, "No, sir." He left us, and we could hear him going to each room, asking the same question and getting the same reply. When he had made the rounds and returned to his bed, we got up and undressed, and were soon dreaming of our adventurous evening. Of course, many questions were asked the next day, but Paige and I were as silent as the sphinxes. Okay, that's what you can read in his book. And now we come back as far as the end again. Just a few comments on these people. Miguel Antonio Otero Sr. not only was the motivating force behind the company, not only was a visionary who understood what the railroad would do to the business that he was in, but he was a consummate businessman. He brought the first telephone to New Mexico, the Las Vegas Telephone Company. This is before 1882. He opened one of the first banks in New Mexico, the Las Vegas National Bank, okay? This is the picture of the senior moment. The Plaza Hotel in Las Vegas, it was built 2 years after the railroad reaches Santa Fe in the year in which Miguel Sr. dies. And then I just had to throw in a saloon because that's what Las Vegas was. Actually, that building is still standing too. Is that the Palace Ballroom, I think, or something like that? I only went there once, so, I don't really know what the bar was like or anything like that, okay? But Miguel Sr., as I say, was the U.S. territorial delegate from New Mexico Territory in the 1850s. The one smirch on his record, maybe from our perspective, is his wife, Mary Josephine, her family owned slaves, so she brought her slaves with her to New Mexico. And New Mexico, when the Civil War broke out, had to decide, are we north or south, are we slave or free? And Miguel Sr. Sponsored the bill which kept slavery legal in New Mexico Territory. But he also invested in mines in Mexico and in South America. He had plans when he died to build a railroad from Albuquerque to the western Mexico coast near Acapulco so he could tap into the Pacific trade. I just find him a fascinating person. John Perry Sellar, as I say, we know very little about. This is the only photograph that we have of him. And again, the internet is interesting. When I published an article on him in Wagon Tracks a few issues back, if you want to know more about him. But when I went looking for a photo, I found that there was one in the library of the University of New Mexico. So I duly wrote for permission. Can we reproduce this in Wagon Tracks? I filled out all the forms. They sent me the photo. We published it, and then I went online, and it's all over the place. But you need to be careful if you're involved in publications. So views of Las Vegas. Now we're going to really reach the end, where everybody died and is buried. The Oteros are all buried in. By the way, I didn't find any obituary of John Perry Sellar or his wife Marie, or of Mrs. Otero. There's no photograph of Mrs. Sellar. And as I say, that was the only photograph in existence of her husband. Some things just disappear, and as I say, the internet can bring you a lot of other things. The Oteros are buried in Riverside Cemetery in Denver. Anybody in here went with us on the Smoky Hill Trail? Mike was there. Remember when we went out to this? Very sad, not because it was a cemetery, but I grew up next to a cemetery. We got great sledding. But sad because they lost their water rights, and it's just dirt. Every place is dirt. There's no grass growing around the graves or anything. But the Oteros put up a plinth then to Miguel, and the wife and daughter, Gertrude and Mary Josephine, are also buried there. This is me standing next to the plinth. I don't think Mike took the photo. I think my wife took that photo. But that was a fascinating trip. If you're ever in Denver, you can go out there and visit these graves. As far as the Sellar family is concerned, Marie Cornelia Sellar, I don't think it was a happy marriage. By the mid-1870s, she had moved to Philadelphia. There was plenty of money. She lived in a hotel, and she died there. He would visit periodically. But I combed the Philadelphia newspapers, no obituary on her. It's just very, very interesting. I didn't find an obituary of John either, although I think there was one in the Las Vegas Optic, but they're 6 months missing, and that's when he chose to die. I couldn't find anything there. But his gravestone is rather remarkable. It's in the Oddfellows section of the cemetery, the city cemetery in Las Vegas. And of course, if you know about Find a Grave, that's where you can get pictures. Although I have a good friend in Las Vegas, former student, I called him up, said, Bruce, tell me more, go out, take this picture, that sort of thing. So that's all we know as far as he's concerned. Keep pushing. And that brings us to the end, and the quote there from Marie that was missing for some reason, I love the slogan sort of that she echoed. The business was always at the end of the line. The business was always at the end of the road. And those kids grew up, those women persevered, and now we're here at the Fort Wallace Museum to talk about them. And if we just had a nice big picture window there overlooking Sheridan, we could think, well, no, I won't say what my friend Harry would have said. Okay. But I have great admiration for them. I left a little time for questions. If anybody has any, you can direct them to Mike. Well, it's always nice not to have questions. A, because that way you don't have to show your ignorance. And B, you entertain them and they're just stunned with how wonderful it was. Thank you very much.
Mike, thank you so much for that.
I have one more thing.
Oh, you do? Go ahead.
Sure. No, you can stay here.
All right.
Just when I was reviewing this a couple of days ago, it occurred to me, when a train got to the end of the line at the railhead, how did they turn it around? And huh?
A roundhouse, they're saying.
No, you wouldn't build a roundhouse in Sheridan and then a roundhouse in Kit Carson and round. So I typed in Google, how did they turn steam engines around at the end of the line? And damn it, it was there, okay? It's a thing called a Y, W-Y-E. And so the train is here, it pulls up here, or the engine does. Then they build another track this way, so it backs down until and then they can go forward, and then they can hook up to the end of the cars. But when Frank and I were out at Sheridan this morning, I said, well, how did they bend rails? How did you bend a rail? I mean, oh, let's bend this rail. And I don't think they could have shipped rails out to make these Ys because they wouldn't know what the landscape was like. So if anybody comes up with the answer to that one, tell her, okay?
I get it.
Okay,
Okay,
I'm done.
very good. Mike, we're thrilled that you finally gave us this wonderful information in this lecture and so relevant to our subject. You know, it's just right down the alley of taking the Smoky Hill Trail to Santa Fe. And don't leave. Don't leave. Or put your stuff down. There you go. Come back. All right, so on behalf of the Fort Wallace Memorial Association, I'd like to thank you so much for that wonderful presentation.
Oh, okay.
This is our 2021 coin, taking the Smoky Hill Trail to Santa Fe. So there you go.
Ooh.
So thank you.
It's delicious.
Come back. One more thing.
And I would like to present Mike. He's always wanted to be a secret agent, and so he has coin 007 in Dennis K. Clark Lecture Series.
What about the women? No.
That's on your own die.
Okay.
So thank you. I'd like to present you this coin.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Unexpected. Thank you.
So we will have, let's say, a 10-minute break to take care of all kinds of other things, including getting set up for Frank Norris's lecture that comes up next. See you in 10 minutes.